So you can see that I have the whole piece of fabric laying really flat and pinned down at the line, the 112 line, with the silk face down, bump on top, and lining face up. And so now I can start turning the side hems. So here we have the first pin for the overlap leading edge. And then of course after that is going to be the first pleat. So on the bottom, and then the corners at the top also. Then we will fan fold, and then we can sew the pleats and then pinch them and then tack them and hook them and then bag them. Then they're done. Sounds like a lot more steps, but all of those go pretty fast. This is probably my favorite part, especially with a silk drapery and lined with lining and inner lining, bump inner lining, is fan folding, because that's when we get to see how the pleats are going to look and how pretty the silk is going to be. So I have the panels just kind of laying here, and I took out all of the pins in the side hem. All the hems are done and the hand stitching is done. But the pins leave little marks in the side hems, so I want to press that before I start folding. Okay, that looks good. And now I'm going to start the fan folding. So what I need to do first is get the measurement at the top. So this is my return, and this is the first pleat, and then we have space, pleat, space, pleat, space, pleat, space, pleat, and then this is the overlap. So I'm going to line up the pins, this one and this one, that are going to mark off the first pleat right here. This is the return and this is the first pleat. So by lining up those first two pins, that represents the first pleat right here. And so I need to measure from the fold line right here to the end of the return, and that's how much I'm going to fold over this whole return right here on the table. So that is 6 3/8, and then I'll go down to the bottom and mark off the same distance, 6 3/8, right there. So I'm going to mark it with my thumb and then fold it over. And I have a couple of clamps here to help be my extra pair of hands so that I can walk to the head of this panel and back down to the bottom and keep everything in place. So I'm going to double check that. 6 3/8. I'm looking at the corner right here. So I want to have that folded at 6 3/8, and then I'll clamp it right there, and then I can get that whole section and turn under. Give it a little shake. If you have the clamp holding the pleat at the bottom, you can shake it out and get everything laying just right. And then I'm gonna feel for that return over here and then check that the whole length of this fold is measuring out to 6 3/8 and make adjustments. So it was a little bit too big, so I'm pulling over a little bit. The first pleat is important because you're going to measure off of that one for each pleat afterwards. So if you start off too big or too small, then your whole panel is going to be off. And this is going to train the pleats to hang parallel to each other. So it's really important. And if you're going to do it, you might as well be accurate at it. So now I have the whole pleat laying folded over at 6 3/8. And so now we want to take the next pleat and bring it over on top of this one. So this is going to be a different measurement because now we're looking from pleat to pleat instead of from the first pleat to the return. So I'm folding over the next pleat by matching up the pins, and then I'm going to measure from that fold to this fold, and that number is 9.5. So just fold that over up there and then come back to the bottom. You can take off the clamp and then put the ruler at 9.5 and then mark with your thumb at the end of the ruler and then carefully pick up all the layers and pull it towards you. And you want to make sure that all of the layers are coming with the lining and the inner lining and everything. So clamp that down, and then again we can go up here and kind of shake all those layers to get everything to fall into place. And then make some adjustments here. And at this point, I can just feel how much was still underneath. So I'm pulling that out. And you can also see the back fold through the layers and see that it's running parallel all the way down. So here we are, we have 2 pleats folded on the table for this one with panel, and I'm gonna keep going. We already know that the pleat to pleat measurement is 9.5. So I'm gonna fold over the 3rd pleat and then clamp it down and then come to the top and bring over the next pleat. And so now with this last pleat to go, before I pull that one up, you can see that the distance from this pleat here to the leading edge, it's looking pretty even. And if it's not, that means that you have too much fabric pulled over in some areas and maybe not enough in others. So what you could do is you can measure all the way up and down this panel to see how even you are. And that will tell you if you're getting all of these folds pressed over evenly. So here I have about 3/8 too much. And I'm gonna check the top first. So, yep, that should be 15. The top is the most accurate section. So this is all good. That's just a good way to check to see that you're doing a good job and you're fan folding very consistently and accurately. And then before I do the last one, I'm gonna check what the measurement is at the top from the fold to the leading edge. So this one should be 5.5. So I can kind of get that started right there. And then come down to the bottom and then measure from the leading edge to 5.5. And then pinch that with your thumb and pull it over. So now we have the whole thing fan folded. And I'm just gonna get this last pleat laying here, and then I'm gonna measure the whole thing, this top fold all the way down, and make sure it's 5.5 all the way down. And I'm making sure also that the lining is tucked in there all the way. I did check it. It measures 5.5 all the way from top to bottom, and that means that this whole panel is folded, and you can see how beautiful those folds are with the bump inner lining. It's going to be so pretty when it's hanging. The side hems look beautiful. And the last thing to do, well, not the last thing, but last couple things, we're going to stitch the pleats. So we'll take this to the machine and stitch right here. And it's a 6-inch header, so that's a lot more of a header than your normal 4-inch. So we'll stitch those, and then we'll pinch them, and then tack them, put the hooks in, and then wrap it up. So to keep them all together before we go to the machine, I'm just gonna take some remnants of blackout ties and tie it all up. You don't want to tie it too tight, just enough to hold it all together. So this is going well, and I have one more to fan fold, Then we'll move over to the walking foot machine to sew the pleats. And then the tacker to do the tacks. And then we get to see how our pretty weird goblet pleats look. I think they're gonna look great. Okay, so I'm gonna just move this one aside and bring over the next one. Okay, we're done fan folding, and look how pretty this silk panel is. Next step is stitching the pleats. Okay, here we are at the walking foot sewing machine. This is where I like to sew pleats because the walking foot will do a better job than a regular machine because it walks over the fabric with the 2 feet working together instead of with 1 foot pushing the fabric. So this will keep the fabric from pushing, and it'll have a nice strong stitch, and it also allows more thickness to fit underneath the foot. So there's lots of reasons why I like to use the walking foot for sewing pleats. And the first step is getting the pins lined up at the top, and then each edge of the pleat lined up here. So once you have that ready to go, you want to feel for where the bottom of the buckram is, so I can kind of see it and I can feel it. And these are 6-inch pleats, so you can check your size with the ruler also. And then you're going to take the ruler and measure from the pin to the fold of the pleat. And then whatever that distance is where you're going to line up the needle at the bottom from the edge of the pleat to the middle of the foot. And then start sewing and aim for the pin up here to get a nice even parallel line, parallel with the pleat right there. And I'm gonna go the first time through without back stitching, just to get that stitch basted into place. Once you get close enough to the pins, you can take them out. And then go back over it a second time, and this time you want to back stitch in the beginning and the end. Now I have my pleat stitched into place, and the whole stitch has more than one layer of stitching by going through it the first time without the back stitching, and then the second time through I just need to back stitch a little bit in the beginning and a little bit at the end. If you don't want to go through the process twice like I did, then you have to stitch all the way up and then all the way back and then all the way up, or at least all the way up and back. And I am, especially with a 6-inch pleat, not comfortable doing that. I get a much straighter line if I just go through it once first, and then on the second pass backstitch beginning and end. And you can't even tell that there's more than one stitch there. The reason for all the extra stitching is because the hook is gonna get pinned through the back somewhere down here. And if you just backstitched up here and down here, then where the hook goes in over here, over time, it's going to rip through those stitches. So you want to make sure and have a lot of good tight stitches all the way through. Okay, so I'm going to just continue stitching these pleats. There's only 5 per panel, so 4 left on this one and 5 on the next one. And just getting the pins lined up at the top. And I'm going to measure top to bottom just to line up my starting point. Okay, so now I have all of these pleats stitched, and I just have to trim the threads. I leave that for the end because it's faster. And then I can double and triple check myself that I have 2 stitches over each pleat because I have 2 threads to cut. Sometimes I get distracted and I realize I only did 1 pass, and then I can catch myself and fix it before I get too far. Okay, cool. So now I'm ready to do the other one, and then I can pinch these. That's going to be really exciting to see what the pleats look like. Okay, we're almost done with this pair of panels, and we just need to pinch the pleat, and we need to have 3 fingers. So I'm grabbing the middle of the pleat and pushing it down so that I can grab 3 equal sections, and then I'm gonna put a clip at the bottom. And then to get the look that this designer wanted, we're just gonna open it up at the top a little bit, and that's it. Very simple. If this was a traditional 3-finger pleat, we would make sure that all 3 of those 3-finger sections stayed crisp all the way to the top. But in this case, we want that middle one to kind of stick out a little bit. So I'm kind of pulling it forward so that when it gets tacked at the bottom, it'll get tacked with that middle one kind of protruding forward, and that will help it stay in that position, just like that. So I already got the other panel ready to go, and they're all clipped, ready to take to the tacker. So just have 3 more on this one to go. And you can see how big and tall these are with the 6-inch buckram in the header. If these were only 4-inch pleats, you know, you would get a lot less of this middle part sticking out. It would be the same thing, but much more petite. So this is a nice tall 6-inch pleat. And we're not going to call this an ugly goblet. We're just going to call it a semi-goblet. How about that? What would you call it? Help me name this pleat. It definitely is not ugly, and it's definitely not a traditional goblet. So we need a new name for this pleat right here. I think it's kind of cool. Maybe she's onto something. Okay, so 1 more step, well, 2 more steps. Tack them and then put the hooks in the back. So we'll head over to the tacker. Okay, so we're at the tacker, and I just want to get a tack at the bottom of this pleat right here, leaving the middle sticking out so it will keep this shape right here. This is exactly what the designer is going for, so I'm trying to hold that in place. There. That'll do. Even though these are really thick, the fabric is soft, so it allows the needle to go all the way through with no problem. Just have these little tails to clip away. Looks good. One more. These are very cool. Okay, so I can turn this off and then get to package these up after I put in the hooks. Whoops. I forget that foot comes down when you turn it off. It's trapping my drape. So how cool are these? 1 pair of silk drapery with bump inner lining. All finished, ready to wrap up. Here's my plastic and my label right here. And they're tacked. Last thing to do is drapery pins, hooks. I don't know why people call them pins because they're really hooks. I like to do it the old-fashioned way, and I just use a ruler. And for a 1/2 inch pin setting, I know that I need to put the hook in at 1 7/8. And then that leaves the hook a 1/2 inch from the top. And then one at the return. I need a extra tool to drive some of these in. There we go. So you see how the hook goes in way down here? That's why the stitch needs to be so tight all the way through, not just up at the very top. And you want to make sure that the hook doesn't go through the front at all, only through the stitch. A lot of people like to use the measuring tool that measures and then helps drive it in, but it's really a clumsy piece of equipment, and I'd rather just do it this way. I feel like I get a more accurate measurement, and I feel like I can get right through the middle of the stitch rather than through the side. And anybody that likes to use it, then I think that's great. Okay, one more here. This is the overlap, leading edge, and you want to grab some of that buckram. There we go. So that one's done. Some of them are just really fighting me. There we go. And others are very easy. You just have to be careful not to poke yourself when you're pulling these through, and also not to rip out your fabric or your stitching. When it goes just in the right spot, you can feel it. Make sure it doesn't go through the front. There we go. These are just so pretty. I'm going to wrap them up. I'm going to tie these down, but I want to get a few more pictures beforehand. They're just so pretty, I don't even want to wrap them up. This hook is keeping that middle pleat from sticking out like it's supposed to. So I want to make sure that they're all moving freely, because that's the look the designer is going for. Because that's the look the client is going for, so that's the important thing. Yep, these are all free, so okay, done. Done and done. Yay, happy dance. Okay, so they're all done. I have these all wrapped up, and I just wanted to take one more glance. Can you tell how beautiful the bump makes this silk fabric? Here's a little bit of the leftover silk, and you can see how thin it is. And these are just 2 1/width panels laying here, pleated with 5 pleats each. I think they're going to be amazing.